This is the Ivy League Hoops Hour, where we cover all things men's basketball in the Ancient Eight. We are your hub, your go-to, your day one, but not really though. I'm your co-host, Coach Sidney Johnson, former head coach of the Princeton Tigers from 2007 to 2011 and former three-time captain of the Tigers in 95, 96, and 97. And my co-host joining me is Princeton alum and former Princeton graduate assistant coach, my man, Lawrence L. Boogie Schuler. Lawrence, how you making out?
I feel great, Coach. How you doing?
I'm doing terrific, Lawrence. I'm excited about this week and the show and everything that we have to talk about. And before we dive in, just want to remind folks, every week we're certainly happy to entertain any questions, comments, suggestions you have for the show. So email us at ivyleaguehoopshour@gmail.com. We also have a hashtag on Twitter, Ivy League Hoops Hour, where we're posting video and comments throughout the week. But please, we want to make this interactive, not only for me and L Boogie, but for our listeners as well. So join us anytime and throughout the week. What's captivated a ton of sports talk radio and TV shows and the like, and social media and online print, ESPN and all the others, is Lincoln Riley, the current, or I guess former, leaving, even before the season ends. Lincoln Riley, head coach at Oklahoma, he jumps to USC. And Brian Kelly, who was coaching Notre Dame, he jumps to LSU. And just the kind of conversation about, coaches leaving before the season ending and what that means in college sports. I just want to talk about it as it relates to college basketball, because I can't speak to football, but I do think that there are some, ethical issues there, and just this conversation. And I'm just going to weigh in on where I come at it, Lawrence. And as always, I want to hear from you. But I'll say this, as it relates to the Ivy League, and maybe this doesn't apply to ACC, Big East, but, this is the Ivy League Hoops Hour. And so that's where I'm going to root this conversation. There are a couple coaches in our league, one who is nationally recognized as doing an outstanding job, and he quite simply has, and I take no exception to that. But James Jones at Yale, went roughly 12 seasons between his first Ivy League championship in 2002. So I guess it's, if I'm doing my math right, it's 13 seasons between 2002 when he won an Ivy League championship all the way to 2015. And in this day and age, I can't see in a one bid league where there's only going to the NCAA, and very rarely, if ever, in the Ivy or other one big leagues, is there someone going to the NIT, say, especially in the Ivy League where there was no tournament. So that pretty much kind of ruled us out of it. So a very rare situation, but it's happened. I can't see a coach in this day and age going 13 years between championships in a single bid league and retaining his job. I think of Mike Martin, who's done an outstanding job at Brown. And I mean that. There's not a whole lot of tradition there, respectfully. And Mike Martin has a winning season, his second season in the head chair. And then he goes, I think, 6 seasons before he has another winning season. And it was worth it. He goes 20-12, 5 or 6 years after his only winning season at Brown. And 20 wins is the most wins in program history, single season tally. So it was worth it. But again, single bid league. Okay, so not a lot to hang your hat on if you're not going to the big dance. It's just like another season in the books. And in this day and age, in some of these other conferences, are ADs living with that? Are presidents living with that? Are fans happy with that in terms of the amount of time that goes in between those winning championship years? And I would say no, you're not happy with that. And that's the proverbial you. I'm not trying to attack any of our listeners, but I'm telling you, in this climate, there are very, very, very few conferences that'll roll with that. Very few sports programs that will roll with that. And so, why do I bring that up? Because coaches are seeing that too, and they're staying ahead of the curve. And so, a guy like Lincoln Riley, for whatever reason, a guy like Brian Kelly, and listen, I'm not a fan of Brian Kelly. I'm a Michigan football fan. All right, go blue all day, all night. Okay, so I'm not rooting for Notre Dame. I'm not rooting for Brian Kelly. All right, I'm not his agent. But that guy is going, hey, I'm going to stay ahead of this curve. These are some of the things that influences coaches. And I think one of them is just the solid truth that we're just a lot more impatient with our sports programs and what we want from them and what we expect from them. And instead of waiting for an evolution of a program and the coaching and the recruiting and things to blend together and come together, it seems like we want a quick fix. Well, coaches see that, and coaches want a steady gig. What do you think, Lawrence?
I think longevity is all well and good, and it's always great to see coaches lasting in their positions. And in as much as each program wants a generational coach, the business reality in terms of changing administrations, whether it's the university president or the ADs, any type of administrative change puts some pressure on head coaches in all different sports to keep their jobs, because it seems like these administrators want their own creatures in those posts. And so when it comes down to coaches leaving early, you have to go where their security is. And in college football, it may not be ideal to be leaving with one game left on the schedule, but you have to recruit, you have to get out on the road, you have to get the jobs while they're open, and you can't necessarily wait a month to accept an interview. And until they want to change the calendar, I think this is the way it has to be.
When you talk about administration change in the athletic department, what I would submit is I don't care what's going on in terms of the athletic department at Penn, at Dartmouth, at Cornell, Columbia, all 8. Something is going to hold true, and that is a commitment to excellence in education and trying to turn out the best students in the world. And so that trumps just about everything that you might be trying to accomplish athletically. Like, as long as they go hand in hand, it's fine. But if athletics tries to go ahead of academics, it ain't happening in the Ancient 8. And so, Lawrence, that's why you can have consistency of coaches, because if there's a real passionate, genuine commitment to developing tremendous young men and women while you're trying to win games, basketball, field hockey, soccer, you can keep your job. But if you're at, and I would submit, many other mid-major and high-major institutions, then what you're talking about exactly holds. And that's the issue that I have, that, hey, we're coming down on coaches, when if there was a hold to core values that trumped everything else, you might not have coaches jumping from ship to ship just to keep their job. In case you forgot, this is the Ivy League Hoops Hour. Lawrence, what's next on the syllabus?
Big slate of games in the Ivy League this week. 7 of the Ancient 8 in action on Wednesday. First up, we have Yale at home against Lehigh. Yale was down 8 at halftime and came back in the second half and put up 57 points on Lehigh.
Jeez.
To my eye, it looked like you could credit 3 things to Yale's big second half. First, defensive pressure on the ball in the half court and the full court, making Lehigh run its offense from the extremes of the court.
Okay.
They had a little bit of trouble deterring the post entry, but I think when you put up 57, it puts enough scoreboard pressure on the other team to be perfect. Yale also did a great job on the offensive glass. Isaiah Kelly and E.J. Jarvis did a great job of giving Yale second chance opportunities and then converted their free throws, 3 for 3 and 3 for 5, so combined 75%. It's just about where you need to be. And lastly, I had to do a double take. I'm looking at Yale's half-court offense in the second half, and I see 1-2-2. Then I see point over the top. And then I never thought I would have seen this, but forwards out to fingers. I think that possession in particular took me by surprise.
well, add Yale to the list of teams running Princeton offense, as you rattled off a couple of staples of some of the modern Princeton offensive plays. You got Dartmouth, Columbia, Cornell, and obviously Princeton running some variations of some of that stuff. But let's tip our hat to the Bulldogs in terms of that huge second half. And Lawrence, if you look at the league as a whole, we didn't get all the wins that we wanted on Wednesday, but certainly a league that is showing a lot of fight and grit in the second half. 5 of those 7 games, Ancient Eight teams outscored their opponent in the second half. So whether we're a little bit slow out of the block or just really digging in the second half, that's pretty impressive to see. And that leads me right into Princeton, who played a tough game at Hofstra the other day. And, Hofstra is, they got the win, Hofstra did, and leveled their season at 4-4 with a huge win against the Tigers. But Hofstra's played some really good teams. So that schedule, they've been battle tested. And we obviously know that Princeton has been hot coming out of the gate. So Princeton was down 16 points in the second half and came storming back, obviously shooting the ball well. The final score was 81-77, but cut it to 1 point. All right, cut the deficit to 1 with roughly about 50 seconds left to go, Lawrence. And don't you know, the Hofstra Pride bank in a 3 to get that 4-point spread, and the Tigers weren't able to come any closer. So gutsy performance by Mitch Henderson's team, and don't you know, they're getting now everybody's A game. All right, Princeton, I think, is the best team in the league, and people are recognizing that and being up and ready to play the Tigers. So they're going to be certainly tested and tried out before they get in the Ivy League play. The other game that stuck out to me was Brown. I'm watching them very closely, Lawrence. There's some athleticism there that's very impressive with just about every guy that Mike Martin puts on the floor. They got a pair of wins, back-to-back wins, and they were able to get UMass Lowell just the other night. And the kid Chow, fifth-year senior, really huge impact player for the Brown Bears, scores 26 points, gets his 1,000th point. Huge milestone for him. But Mike Martin, they're interesting. And as I'm always thinking about the top 4 teams in the league, I'm starting to look a little bit closer. We'll see. I don't quite have them in the top half of the league, but a good win for Brown and some momentum as they get kind of in these holiday days in December or January, trying to get some momentum before they get into Ivy League play.
Coach, I also got to look at Harvard against Rhode Island. It was a great test for Harvard against a very, very good mid-major team. URI went into halftime with a 16-point lead on the back of some very aggressive, very physical play, especially on the inside. One name that our listeners might recognize for URI is grad transfer Ismail El Amin, son of UConn great Khalid El Amin, who, if you were a Duke fan in the late 90s like I was, you might still be wounded by his great performance in UConn's run to the national championship. Harvard closed the gap to 3 with 9 minutes to go, 49-46, in the span of about 4 minutes. So I think that shows they have the firepower to compete for the Ivy League championship.
Lawrence, that's a perfect segue into My Eyes Don't Lie to Me. Remember, that's homage to Roy Keane, the great midfielder, played for Manchester United in Ireland. He's currently doing commentary on Sky Sports and other channels over in England, and brings such a great perspective to the game, and always relies on what the games tell him, and doesn't come to the table with any kind of preconceived notions. And so we're watching all these games, and I'll tell you, like 7 games the other night was just a full slate, Boogie. And when you're taking notes as well, we got a lot of work to do, and that's the joy of coaching and staying close to the game. And so now, as we go to My Eyes Don't Lie to Me, we focus on the games, teams, and players of the week in the Ancient Eight. And Lawrence, I'll let you start off with Game of the Week. What do you have?
My game of the week was Yale Lehigh on the back of a 57-point second half and great guard play and physical post presence. I'll have to tip my cap to Yale.
Nice. For me, it was pretty challenging. First of all, there were just a lot of games played, and I want to start with the Harvard Northeastern game. Harvard wins by 20 points, 77-57 last weekend, and they were down like 16 points early in the first half, and they were actually looking like they were going to get run out of the gym. They go into halftime down 10. they actually took the lead before the first media timeout in the second half, and then just kept on balling, and played a really good defense. So the reason I would mention that, because then I had circled the game that you talked about with Rhode Island. I was like, okay, now, so here's a huge game, A10, good opponent, and Harvard's getting them on their home floor. I really felt like they could move up in terms of their stature in the league by getting that win, and they just couldn't quite get it done. But those were games that I had circled in my mind. And then I also thought that Dartmouth going at Vermont was another opportunity to make a statement. Dartmouth having won at Georgetown earlier in the year, and Vermont is an outstanding mid-major program that just they win games. That's just what they do. So those were games that kind of stuck out at me. I couldn't pinpoint one, but those three, and still taking something from it. Again, Dartmouth played well in the second half, as I alluded to. A lot of the Ivy League teams are, they're showing some fight. And so, they can take some lessons from there, and Harvard getting a split, but just narrowly missing out on getting a statement win for them this season. Even though we didn't win those games, I still have those as my games of the week. In terms of teams, let's go right into that. And I have to tip my hat to Cornell. They're playing fantastic basketball. There's the analytics, there's the stats, but there's also just easy on the eyes. And they've been fun to watch this season. They're winning games. They're undefeated this week, and they go into a Friday matchup against Coppin State, who actually won the MEAC last year, but somehow, some way. And they actually, the MEAC teams, the HBCUs, they have to go on the road and earn money for their program and for the athletic department as a whole. I say all that to say Coppin State is 1-10 right now, and so they're really struggling. And Cornell is not struggling. They're 6-1 and looking good. So Cornell plays them with a chance to go 7-1 on the year. I don't think anybody would have put money on that, for Cornell to be leading the Ivy League in wins at this stage in the season. So I'm going with them for team of the week. What say you, Lawrence?
I'm going to go with Brown. They went 2-0 over the last week, manufacturing wins over Quinnipiac and UMass Lowell.
Speaking of Brown, that was a huge win for them, I think, at Quinnipiac. They were coming off of a loss, and you're always just fighting for momentum. And so Mike Martin's team gets a good win, and they were led by a first-year player, Keno Lilly Jr. Now, listen, Chow is terrific, fifth-year senior for Brown. We mentioned him. Gainey, their defensive center, he was defensive player of the year the last time the Ivy League was up and running. I don't think there's a defensive player like him in the league. I mean, he's outstanding and should be, I don't want to jinx him, but shoot, he should be a lock to win that award again. But this time they're led by a freshman. I just thought on the road, coming off ball screens, snaking the ball screens, step back threes. I tweeted something out about him looking like Chris Paul and Steph Curry, and I meant every word of it, a mid-major version of those guys for sure. But Keno Lilly Jr. out of Maryland was really good, 24 points in the second half alone, okay? He did that in the second half and led the Bears to a win, and I just thought I had to acknowledge him as my player of the week.
My player of the week is Yale senior Azar Swain. 22 points against Stony Brook, 23 points against Lehigh. He put great defensive pressure on the ball in that Lehigh game, and Lehigh's defenders had a hard time staying in front of him.
So there you have it for our games of the week. Lawrence going with Yale versus Lehigh. I picked a pair of Harvard games and then had that Dartmouth-Vermont matchup circled on my calendar. Our teams of the week, the red-hot Cornell Big Red, matched by Brown, who goes 2-0. Lawrence goes with Swain from Yale, who's been getting it done for many, many years here in this league. And I'm going with the youngster, Keno Lilly Jr. from the Brown Bears. And it'll be fun to see those two go head-to-head once Ivy League kicks in. That's a wrap for My Eyes Don't Lie to Me. On the other side of this break, we'll have our interview with Harvard Crimson's Kale Catchings. We're on our guest segment now at the Ivy League Hoops Hour podcast, and we have a special guest, and they're all special. So I probably shouldn't need to be saying that week in and week out, but this young man is averaging career highs in almost every statistical category: minutes played, scoring average, rebounds, field goal percentage. He's playing a significant role for the Harvard Crimson rotation as they work to overcome a number of injuries. He's also a senior captain, and not surprising, has taken a leadership role on the court and off the court. That's what we do here in Ivy League athletics and men's basketball. We have the Harvard Crimson's Kale Catchings. Kale, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome to have you here. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Lawrence Schuler. And as per usual, Lawrence kicks us off.
Kale, welcome to the pod. When we meet new guests on the pod, we like to learn something about where they're from. So by way of introduction, can you tell us what we need to know about St. Louis basketball and how your AAU and high school experience prepared you to play for Harvard?
Yeah, of course. So originally I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I grew up a little outside in a suburb called O'Fallon, Missouri. Especially when I was growing up in the AAU circuit, we had a lot of talent coming through there. I went to CBC High School, and our main rival was Chaminade High School, which, produced the likes of Bradley Beal, David Lee. And then when I was there, they had obviously Jason Tatum and Tyler Cook on there, and NBA players. Wow. So being able to play against them 2 to 3 times a year, not only there, but also in open gyms and whatnot. We don't have that many other circuit teams. So the Nike UIBL team I was on, it was the St. Louis Eagles, later changed to Bradley Beal Elite, was really like a Midwest powerhouse. My team went to the Final Four of the Peach Jam, and we were able to attract a lot of the talent in the Midwest in general, from Darius Garland to James Wiseman. I had a pretty loaded AAU team. So being able to not only practice with those guys day in and day out, but go out and compete with those guys at the highest level on the circuit, definitely shaped the player who I am, especially in terms of kind of having to find your own role. A lot of guys are used to always being the best player on their team, but especially my 17U year, in order to be able to contribute to my team, I obviously wasn't going to be able to handle the ball like Darius Garland or be a paint presence like James Wiseman. So being able to kind of find my niche and find where those hustle plays, being kind of a junkyard dog, I learned it, in high school, which I'm always grateful for. And then during the high school year, competing against a lot of those very talented guys in the St. Louis area. One of my good friends, Jerkel Helms at NC State. I have a lot of guys that ended up going D1, and we would kind of battle it out all year. So St. Louis is definitely an underrated hoop scene, I would say, and a lot of just hardworking hoopers. And from that, I've kind of learned a lot, and I'm very grateful for that upbringing.
What should we know about Venable Park and its significance to St. Louis?
Oh, yeah. So my freshman year, I think this really speaks to a lot of the opportunities that the Ivy League is, and, especially Harvard in particular. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do for an internship, but I ended up meeting with one of my professors out here, and he wanted me to lend a hand on a project that he was doing in St. Louis. And I really wanted to go home for the summer after, a long freshman year. It's kind of tough being away from home for this extended period of time. So I wanted to go home, and part of that project was this restorative justice piece. And essentially there was this park. It's kind of like in the middle of a neighborhood, and it's in a suburb that's pretty close to where I went to school. And in the late 50s, a Black man wanted to move in here, and he was an ophthalmologist, and he had several other upper class Black families that wanted to move in here and kind of make it a little affluent Black neighborhood. But essentially, by way of the mayor and this white citizens council, they ended up kicking him out by eminent domain. And pretty much like their reasoning for that was they were able to pass a law that if the citizens came up with half the funding for a park or whatever is needed, they could use eminent domain to kick whoever they wanted out of their house. So it's a really weird setup. You drive like all the way through a neighborhood, and there's this huge park. And essentially what they did was they knocked his house down, built a park, and named it after the mayor who helped kick this man out. So basically my job over the summer was to form a movement. We formed a coalition, the Venable Park Coalition, went to several of the town hall meetings, kind of mobilized the community. A lot of people just had no idea the story behind it, but it's a very obvious, there's definitely an obvious background to it just because of the weird placement of the park. So after we were able to kind of put out some education pieces and everything, the city of Creve Coeur was able to finally acknowledge their wrongdoing in the past, and they changed the name from Bernie Park, which is the name of the mayor, to Howard Venable Park, in memory of that ophthalmologist who was kicked out, obviously wrongfully. And it was a really cool moment. They had the official commemoration with a new sign and everything this year. So especially for a freshman year internship, to have that kind of impact on my community immediately definitely helped me to understand exactly why I came to Harvard. And it's not necessarily everything we do on the basketball court, but moments like those and impacts like those that I don't really think you can get anywhere else. It was extremely meaningful to me.
Echoing what you just said in terms of, life being much more than just basketball. And Coach Amaker, you've been quoted as saying that Coach Amaker makes the experience bigger than basketball. So in terms of your relationship with Coach and the institution of Harvard, it clearly can tell how you were drawn there, but can you talk about that a bit more in terms of truly being a student athlete, specifically at Harvard and within the program, and how you live and breathe that now being there in uniform and in classes and on the campus?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, when I was going through the recruiting process, I was an extremely high academic kid in high school. I was valedictorian and everything. So I knew I wanted a high academic place. I had kind of narrowed myself down to a couple Patriot League schools, a couple other Ivies. But when I came here and met Coach Amaker and him being, especially as a Black man, how he carried himself and how he organized the program, and kind of seeing the opportunities that he was able to give guys outside of basketball, and also just the group of guys that we have in the locker room, and kind of being around them for a couple of days and seeing the kind of conversations we have that are just so different than anywhere else that you can visit in the country. I feel like that's really what lured me in. So in terms of how we carry ourselves as student athletes, I think it's really that. It's obviously, we take care of business in the classroom, and that's always been a priority for our program. But it's just the way we carry ourselves whenever we have guests come for dinner. And also in the locker room, I feel like, we'll sit in there for an hour or two and the conversation can take itself wherever, because not only do you have a lot of guys who are dedicated to basketball and dedicated to mastering their craft in that manner, but you have a lot of very highly educated guys who are curious, who are all trying to find themselves. We're kind of obviously in the same stage of our lives where we're really trying to figure out where we want to go next. So be able to bounce ideas off of one another, inspire one another in that regards is, I think, the way we, really embody being student athletes more, because it's not all about what you learn in the classroom, but we also share these experiences outside of basketball, whether it's meeting Justice Elena Kagan or President Jimmy Carter, having these educational pieces that Tommy Amaker kind of procures for us. We're always learning on and off the court. So I've never really second guessed my decision to come here, and it's really lived up to all I thought it would be, and then some.
Kale, not to put you on the spot, but that was awesome. I'm just thinking of you guys sitting in the locker room as student athletes, no coaches around, and having some of those conversations. Can you share, one that stuck out to you in terms of just learning from your fellow players? You're always talking about basketball, but is there a conversation that sticks out in the locker room that kind of added to your education as a student and as a man?
Yeah, of course. Kind of some of the bigger conversations I can remember. We have several kids who have, started services or apps. So, for example, I remember a conversation. My teammate Spencer Friedman has started his app. It's called Clip It, and essentially it's kind of like a social media site or a social media app for gamers where you can post all your clips. We also had our former senior leader, Justin Bassey, who had a tutoring service, and sometimes he would talk about that. And even I remember I would sit down and we would be sitting with Henry and Justin Bassey for me, and they're both older economics guys, and I'm an economics guy. So they would sit there and help me with my homework and walk through my my resume and everything. And I just remember that being a
Yeah.
very kind of aha moment, because we were sitting there literally all still in our practice jerseys, and they were
Right.
helping me send out my resume to Morgan Stanley. So like that's just the kind of stuff like that. I don't really think it happens many other places, but those are just a few examples.
Indeed, indeed, good ones. And under Coach Amaker's leadership, Harvard has hosted like a monthly get together with your team, with student athletes and notable speakers and guests. And you kind of hinted at it, but from what I know, talking to Coach, and we've formed a friendship over the years, these meetings are coined the Breakfast Club. And so
Mm-hmm.
you know well what I'm referring to. And somewhat in the same mind is there a breakfast club that sticks out to you where you've had that same aha moment and you've been influenced and changed in a lasting way?
Honestly, there's been several. The most recent one I very much enjoyed, because it was Mark Tatum, Deputy Commissioner of the NBA. He came to speak along with Gus Johnson, and they were just two very lively presences, and they were able to kind of speak on the NBA, which is always obviously very much interested me. But I think one of the most moving ones was I was in California over the past year, and he was adamant to continue the Breakfast Club even over Zoom. And as you can imagine, an 8:30 Eastern time breakfast correlates to 5:30 on the
Yeah,
West Coast.
right.
But there was one time we had Dr. J come speak, and my grandpa actually had played with Dr. J. So there was a moment I kind of got to ask him a question and have a little back and forth with my grandpa, and just hearing how much basketball has changed, and kind of being able to talk to him about his experience playing basketball and how different it was, and also get a better understanding of how my grandpa played, like what the NBA was like back then. I wouldn't say it was necessarily an aha moment, but that's definitely a Breakfast Club that speaks to me, because I very much felt like it resonated with me on a personal level for that reason. And
Sure.
also, like, just being able to talk to a living legend in such a close knit circle like that, just my teammates and a couple other guys, was very impactful for sure.
That's really cool. On the Ivy League Hoops Hour, we're so fortunate to have guests like Kale Catchings. And what about that image of him in the locker room with his teammates still in practice gear working on his resume? Those are the types of perspectives and insights that we simply can't get without going straight to the source. So if you want other sources and storylines like that, I know Lawrence and I are really enjoying them. Please write in your suggestions for guests that we might invite on the show in the future. Ivy League Hoops Hour at gmail.com. We invite all of your emails and we look forward to them. Let's get back to our interview with Kale Catchings. What about you clearly are engaged and so much, so thoughtful, and you can play ball, and you're having this larger role on the team, and we'll talk about that. But you had this experience with the NABC Player Development Coalition. I'm wondering what that experience was like. Is it still ongoing? And has it allowed you an opportunity to address issues that are significant to student athletes, name, image, likeness, diversity, inclusion, mental health, or issues, Kale, that you've brought to the table that are meaningful to you? So can you tell us a bit about that experience?
Yeah, of course. It is still ongoing under the leadership of Craig Robinson over at NABC, and it's really been a valuable experience. Especially, I think they do a very good job. There's a lot of guys from the bigger colleges, your Duke, your North Carolinas, your Gonzagas, but there's also a couple of us, mid-major guys who are able to kind of air out our grievances. And as a result, I think it's been a very, very productive coalition. I think the biggest thing we did last year with the ongoing pandemic, a lot of our attention was focused on kind of the ins and outs of last year being such a crazy year. Even though we didn't play, I felt like being away and having been selected to the coalition, I still wanted to take part and be involved in that manner. And especially before we actually knew our season was canceled, I, myself, and some of the other members were ones that very much pushed for the idea that we would be able to get eligibility back whether we played or not, which obviously didn't end up mattering for us as we did not play at all. But being able to push an initiative like that had real worth was extremely valuable. And then also I got on it in October, so the most pressing issue is name, image, and likeness, especially for some of the other guys, your Armando Bacot, Corey Kispert, Drew Timmy, those guys who have really been able to take advantage of the NIL in very big ways, being some of the most prominent college players in the country.
Indeed.
So, being able to have gain an understanding of what the NIL would look like before it was kind of put into place, understand what it meant for student athletes, understand what it didn't guarantee for student athletes, and kind of give our feedback in that regards. A lot of it was kind of already in motion, so it wasn't necessarily us putting our grievances forward, but being able to understand and communicate that to our various programs was also very helpful. And I think going forward, I'm hoping we can get more into kind of these social issues. We talked about kneeling and what that would mean, but with all those issues so prominent over the past, we only meet maybe once or twice a month. It was tough to really get into the nitty gritty of everything, especially with the kind of up and down season it was last year. But I'm hoping this year, as we kind of get into the flow of a more normal season, we can focus on the issues you brought up, namely mental health. I think that's always been very important to me, especially for some of these mid-major guys and especially Ivy League guys, where you have a very intensive course load in addition to pretty much the same basketball load. I think that'll be very key, and it's starting to enter the conversation more. But seeing what we can do specifically for our guys is definitely something that's high on my list.
Well, now you are back on the court. Thank goodness for everyone, for you, your coaches, but true fans, and having coached in the league and played in the league. It's a conference that's near and dear to my heart. So we're going to stay close and watching you, and we're not too far removed from an exciting Harvard win over Colgate as we tape this interview, and Sakota hits a dang near a half court shot to send you guys into overtime.
Yep.
But it's you have the highs and lows of a season and trying to get momentum, and you're playing a bigger role. Just talk to us about the year to date and what you've taken from it and the excitement that you have as you get closer and closer to Ancient 8 play.
First and foremost, it's like you said, it's a blessing to be back on the court. So I think we've realized even in the early going in preseason, there's a different kind of lightness to everyone, knowing that at any moment all of this can be over. And we saw our season be ended, with the snap of a finger, obviously, for a very important reason. And I'm glad that our conference was as cautious as they were in ending our season, and was obviously necessary. But as a result, I think guys are just grateful to be back out there. And in terms of the season, it's funny, like especially for everyone being at least, almost 2 years removed, and then two classes who have never been through a college basketball season, you always kind of have that first game circled on your calendar. But I think it serves as a shock to some of the guys that after that is when it really starts picking up. So especially over the past couple of weeks, I think we've had something like 5 games in 8 days in this little stretch here. So, with including 2-day trips to Albany. So really getting back into the flow of things has been an interesting grind, especially amidst our injuries amongst some of our posts. So we have a lot of guys who are kind of playing positions they're not used to, but I think more than anything, we've displayed a tremendous amount of fight, even in we had an overtime loss to Iona, which looks a little better in light of their big win against Alabama. But
Indeed.
We've had some tough opponents, some tough road games, and for us to be able to gut this win out against Colgate was huge in that respect. So I'm feeling pretty good about the momentum we have, the fighting force that we've been able to display through our first couple games, and I think especially with having, like I said, having a year off, having 2 years of people who haven't gone through a college basketball season at all, I think our learning curve is going to be pretty steep in the fact that we're going to get better very quickly, especially as we get our post players back and everything. So I'm very happy. Being a senior captain, the group of guys we have is phenomenal. Love being around them on the court, love being around them off the court. So I'm very excited to see what we have to do. And I think the Ivy League's looking pretty good. So it's going to be an exciting competitive year. I don't think there's any I'm gonna miss all of our back-to-backs. I must say, I don't know how I feel about this schedule change, but being able to get into the nitty-gritty of the Ivy League schedule is something I can't wait for, and I know the guys are going to be ready.
Kale, I have to follow up on that, and it's actually kind of cool to hear you say that. So I played 100 years ago at Princeton. Okay, so I'm dating myself, but I really appreciated the grind and the rigor that the Friday, Saturday just forced you to be good. You know what I mean? It just forced you to be that good to play back-to-back games and to have a regular season champion go into the NCAA tournament based off of that, that grind, as you said. You just said that you miss it, and then it's kind of cool to hear from a student athlete in terms of you'll have 3 of those, but then the majority of games will be essentially 1 game per week. Talk to me from your vantage point a little bit more about liking those traditional Friday, Saturday matchups in conference play. Of
course, I mean, it really just comes down to wanting it. And I think there's such a fun intensity to those back-to-back games. Namely for us, I remember, having Brown on a Friday and then having to go into New Haven on a Saturday after playing a game Friday, coming into a hostile environment like that. It's
right.
It's a real test for your team. So I'm gonna miss that intensity, that kind of, just having to gut it out. Like none of those wins are you can't take any of those wins for granted, no matter where you go in the Ivy League with that back-to-back format. And it's interesting also seeing around the league, because you also don't know what's going to happen around the league because of that back-to-back format, which, will obviously stay the same to an extent. But I also was always, I'm very much like a creature of habit. So I very much enjoyed the fact that each of my weekends looked the same. And once you get into Ivy League, we practice on the same exact days, play on the same days, with the exception maybe if one of the places, if we're going to Cornell or something, you might have to leave a day earlier or something like that. But I think I'm just probably going to miss the routine of that schedule more than anything. But it'll be interesting to see how this shakes out. And I think that there, especially the decision making, I trust the decision making behind it and trying to give guys more rest. And especially right now when we have a low number of guys, and hopefully, we get better injury wise, but who knows what that'll look like in January and February.
That is a change. And like you said, we'll see how it plays out. But thank you for sharing your opinion on that and your time in general, Kale. This has been terrific for Lawrence and I to join you. And before we let you go, we always pose this to our guests because it's important for us to know what the student athletes, the coaches, we may have administrators on, whomever who are close to the league. There might be something that you wish would occur at Harvard, and it can be, with your team, Kale, on campus, or Ivy League athletics, education, academics. But something that you would love to see in the near future that would take shape. Anything come to mind that you care to share?
I think that especially Ivy League student athletes, we're in a rare era in terms of being, high achieving students as well as athletes. And I think especially in this day and age of NIL, I feel like there's an opportunity for mentorship in that regard, especially when you think about, what parents are going to do to try to get their kids into Ivy League institutions. And I feel like the student athlete base in general, not just basketball, but all student athletes being able to pick their minds, especially for kids in each respective sport, being able to pick their minds that I know I would have benefited from in middle school and high school, because you just kind of, especially as the caliber of basketball players specifically in the Ivy League, they're not kids that are just kind of playing on okie doke teams. These are kids that are competing on EYBL teams, competing on top high school teams. So being able to talk to other guys that kind of have followed that same path, I feel like happens every now and again, but I feel like it can be formalized in a better manner to, not only, to kind of better procure the next crop of student athletes that come to Ivy League institutions.
Well, I'm thinking of the support and relationships that you have with Coach Amaker and also with your teammates in the locker room, where something tells me that something like that mentorship program will formalize or could formalize itself there in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and maybe Kale Catchings will be associated with it. We'll have to wait and see. But I appreciate you sharing that and spending time and being so thoughtful with your responses, Kale. On behalf of Lawrence and myself, thank you for joining us on the Ivy League Hoops Hour.
Of course, this has been great. Thank you so much for having me.
We're now at the segment of our show, Lawrence, where we get to respond to questions, comments, emails, suggestions, the whole gamut here on the Ivy League Hoops Hour. So, Lawrence, what do we have this week?
Our first one this week comes from Bill Williams. Bill writes, I represent a good investment group as a financial consultant. We're expanding our global presence by investing in viable projects across the globe. We'll be willing to inject from $5 million to $900 million and more in a viable project. What do you say? Can you use an extra 900 mil?
Yeah, man. But Bill might be shocked, Lawrence. I need a little bit more than that. So maybe 9 plus a signing bonus or something like that.
Yeah, whenever you're ready. We just need your checking account information and your social security number.
Right. It reminds me of those emails you get where there's the Nigerian prince who needs you to wire some money right away, and then he's happy to send you a check later on. Bill Williams, we're not going for it. Any other emails in our inbox?
Our next one came from a few of our listeners, but one in particular. Paul in North Carolina writes, what makes Cornell's offense the most potent out of the Ancient Eight? Thank you and have a blessed day.
Well, yeah, Paul, thanks for writing in. And, I do think the Big Red's offense is potent. It's electric. It's so easy on the eyes. They're flying up and down, getting backdoor layups and corner cut layups and threes, the whole deal. So they've been terrific, and there's no doubt it's the best offense in the Ivy League right now. And I say that not necessarily looking at kind of the old school numbers, if you will, Lawrence. I mean, Cornell is the highest scoring team in the league. They're averaging over 86 points per game, and they're the only team in the league averaging over 80. They're averaging, they're first in assists in the league, 19 a game. And the next best team isn't within 4 assists per game. They have the best assist to turnover ratio, Lawrence. And so they're playing at this, crazy fast pace. They actually rank in the top 30 in the country in terms of possessions per game. But then you look at the assist to turnover ratio, and they're taking care of the ball. So they're not playing reckless, but they are playing fast. And then their field goal percentage is fantastic and at the top of the league. But those are the old school numbers. And then you have the look test. But the real analytics that you want to look at is offensive efficiency, Lawrence. And that's where the potency, the productivity for Cornell is just off the charts. Okay. Their points per possession. And so that takes out the possible distortion of tempo and allows you to look at teams and compare apples to apples. What are they doing? What, Lawrence, are you doing with your team in your possessions? And what am I doing with my team in my possessions? We kind of level it off, and that's how we can compare. And the Big Red are stunningly good. They rank 45th in the country in terms of the points that they're yielding per possession at 1.08. And they're doing the same thing on the road. They're just a shade off of that in terms of what they're able to do on the road. Princeton actually comes in at 1.07 per possession. So that's pretty good. But then you have the opposite end of the spectrum where, you have a Dartmouth Big Green that are playing, fairly slow basketball. The last time I checked, they were coming in at about, 0.911. And Columbia somewhere in there as well. So less than a point per possession. So no matter how you slice it, Lawrence, Paul, our listeners, no matter how you look at it, okay, if you're in a 100 possession game, a 70 possession game, a 50 possession game, the Cornell Big Red are going to score more points than any other team in the league. And as the late, great James Baldwin once said on the Dick Cavett show, this is the evidence. Now, the only caveat, the only caution I would say, Lawrence, is that this is non-conference play, non-conference numbers, okay? Certainly we could get into the league and Cornell could prove a lot less effective in terms of scoring the ball. We'll just have to wait and see, but we don't know that. just right now in their current form, everybody else in the league, without question, is looking up at how well the Big Red are scoring the basketball. We now get to touch upon our non-Ivy League nods of the week. And Lawrence, you'll kick this one off for us.
I think my nod goes to the Air Force Falcons. After losing their first game of the year in a close matchup against South Dakota, they've won 6 in a row. They sit at 6-1, and they play Army at home on Saturday.
Got to be rooting hard for the Falcons. All right, let's fly. Got to give a shout out to my guys, Coach Metz, Chet, Cam, Hollum, and of course, Joe Scott, the head coach there at Air Force. Huge game against the Army in terms of that Service Academy rivalry. You'd be rooting hard for the Falcons. My nod is going to go to the unranked Ohio State Buckeyes. It pains me, Michigan football fan, but I've got to give it up for Ohio State as they hosted the number 1 ranked Duke Blue Devils and were able to knock them off. Obviously, they had to deal with Paolo Panchero and Trevor Keels and the whole crew. And the Buckeyes came back from 15 points down in the second half. Somehow, some way, they were able to hold Banchero, I should say. I hope I'm getting that right. 0 for 7 from the field in the second half, Boogie. And Paolo is like a mix between LeBron and KD. He's just oozing with talent. So big-time win there for Chris Holtman. And those are our non-Ivy League nods of the week. As we spread some love throughout the league, we got to look at the Harvard women's field hockey team, coached by Jurk Van Heerwaarden and led on the field by first-team All-American Hannah Pierce. The Crimson went 17-2 this season. They were undefeated in the Ivies. They won their 3rd Ivy League championship in 5 years. And the biggest thing they did is they reached the Final Four of the Women's NCAA Field Hockey Championship for the first time in school history. I would say that's not bad. So we're tipping our hat to you, Harvard Women's Field Hockey Team. Now, as we pivot back to all things men's basketball, we've got some big games coming up this week. Lawrence, what do we have?
On Saturday, we have 6 teams in action. We've got Harvard going to UMass, Columbia hosting Maine, Yale at Auburn, Princeton hosting Drexel, Dartmouth at Florida Gulf Coast, and in Big 5 action, Penn versus Temple.
Got to have those circled. And the Ivy League keeps on rolling. This has been a joy. We say it every week, but we mean it. Lawrence and I are having a whole lot of fun, but it doesn't mean much to us if you're not interacting. So please, we invite you, keep those emails, suggestions, topics, anything, guests to bring on the show. Ivy League Hoops Hour at gmail.com. We want this to be interactive and pull you guys into this pod. So stay with us for this fun ride. We're enjoying it every step of the way. We will see you all next week.
Every time I see Tommy Amaker in some random place, whether it's at the gym or whether he's recruiting, or when I was a camper at Seton Hall basketball camp.
They let you be a camper there, Boogie? How'd you get in the door?
I wasn't the smallest camper, but probably the second or third smallest. And I had the greatest camp summer of my life. I was the runner-up in the 101 competition. Okay. I got an autograph for Grant Hill. I was in the demonstration for Dave Hopless shooting. And
nice.
Yeah. I took home the Mr. Hustle Award too. So.
Okay. So is it fair to me to say that to take a shot at you and say one of your greatest highlights was being runner-up in a
that's the best thing you could possibly say about my basketball career.
You know, you're
it's
my guy.
Certainly better than my tennis career.
You're my guy.